So, a few months ago, I uploaded a compilation of my best Kraken clips from the last year and was planning on making a full in-depth breakdown of Kraken afterward to coincide with that compilation. I wrote up a big script, organized all my footage, and got to editing. And then Kraken got one of the biggest balance changes out of nowhere in the mid-season patch, completely warping the special's identity, and thus making a large portion of that script completely outdated. God damn it. Anyways, here's what you need to know. My name's Nikki, and I'm a competitive Splatoon player with 3 seasons of CCA under my belt, and my all-time favorite weapon in Splatoon is the .96 Gal. I've been playing it for so long that when I first picked it up in Splatoon 2, it only did 52 damage. Fast forward a few years later and a whole installment later, and I'm still playing 96 because I genuinely like the main weapon. And then the devs just had to give it one of the most polarizing specials in all of Splatoon 3. When it was revealed that Kraken would be reworked and returning in Splatoon 3, a lot of people were understandably hyped. But that hype quickly turned to frustration when the competitive community realized that Kraken low-key ruined clan blitz for everyone else. The infamous Kraken cheese, where a Kraken user swims to the basket while invincible to get free super jumps in for their team. For nearly all of Kraken's history in Splatoon 3, this was all the special was known for, and any weapons that had Kraken, they were demoted to nothing more than cheese weapons. As for me, I was pretty upset that my favorite gun was getting such a bad rap just because it had a special that I didn't even ask for. Back in February in 2023, I was banking on the 96 Deco actually getting Wavebreaker, but I figured if my favorite gun was going to get Kraken, I was going to give it my best shot to learn how to use it to the best of its ability, and I mean actually use it. Like, in all modes, not just Clan Blitz. That compilation I uploaded back in March hopefully proved that my efforts were not in vain. Kraken can be a very powerful special outside of cheesing Clan Blitz, if you know how to use it. And therein lies the problem. Most people don't know how to use it. Why would they? Its best application was so brain-dead and easy to execute, it's not like you had to learn the special to pull it off. Well, now that best application is gone. As of the mid-season patch in April of 2024, Kraken Cheese has effectively been patched out of the game, meaning knowing how to use Kraken suddenly matters. That's where this video comes into play. I've put in hundreds of hours into playing Kraken, and given that there aren't a lot of in-depth guides on the special out there, I figured now would be the perfect time to share everything I learned about Kraken from my hundreds of hours with it. Not only to coincide with the 1-year anniversary of the special, but also because with Kraken Cheese being removed, now is the best time possible to educate people that yes, Kraken can still be a valuable asset to have on a team, even without its bread and butter move. Without further ado, here is everything I learned about Kraken in the last year. So, right off the bat, let's get all of the boring things out of the way. How does Kraken actually work? In my experience listening to how other people talk about Kraken, or from playing against other people using Kraken, it's clear to me that a lot of people just genuinely don't understand the special. As a quick thesis statement to all the Kraken rookies in the audience though, let me start by saying that Kraken Royale is a completely different special when compared to the Kraken from Splatoon 1. Upon activation, the user transforms into a giant squid that can swim over any inkable surface regardless of turf color, leaving a thick trail of ink behind it. Like normal swim forms, the Kraken moves slower over uninkable surfaces, and trying to swim over grates results in the Kraken just slipping right through them. While the special is active, the user is immune to all sources of damage and can even defuse bombs by swimming into them. The Kraken has 2 ways of attacking enemies, a basic jump attack that hits on all sides of the Kraken for 60 damage, and a forward dash that can be charged by holding ZR that deals 120 damage, instantly splatting any enemy caught in its way. When the user's special duration is up, they are transformed back into their normal swim form, and after about a second of end lag, they are able to exit their swim form and resume playing as normal. By default, Kraken's special duration is 8 seconds, but this duration can be increased by running special power-up on your gear. These are the basics of how Kraken Royale works, and it's what most people, regardless of their experience with the special, know about it. However, there are a lot of finer nuances to the special that you probably wouldn't notice without more experience using it or playing against it. The biggest weakness Kraken Royale has when compared to its Splatoon 1 counterpart is the startup and end lag of the special. Upon activation, the user is locked into a scripted transformation animation that lasts about 1 second, during which the user is completely vulnerable to damage. Conversely, when the special's duration is up, the user is transformed back to their normal swim form, and for about a second, they remain stuck in the normal swim form, unable to fight back against any approaching enemies looking to punish the Kraken. This punishing lag on both activation and recovery means you need to be disciplined in your Kraken usage. The startup means it is not a reliable panic button in the heat of combat, and the recovery means you cannot get carried away with the special. You have to have the willpower to fall back to a safe location before your special duration is up. The most common mistake I see novice Kraken users make is not respecting the transformation and recovery lag enough. Another overlooked weakness of Kraken is that although it is fully immune to damage, it isn't immune to knockback. Sustained rapid fire at a distance can keep a Kraken at bay, and when trying to swim over a ledge, any damage at all is usually enough to knock the Kraken off the wall, forcing them to scale it all over again just to get another chance. Longer ranged weapons with high fire rates are the best at keeping Kraken stalled from a safe distance. Splatlings, in particular, are a very difficult matchup for Kraken, as they not only have the range and fire rate to keep Krakens at bay, but Splatling players naturally like to position themselves on top of high up ledges that Kraken struggles to scale quickly, making it extremely difficult for a Kraken to approach a Splatling player head on. The last thing I want to touch on when discussing the weaknesses of Kraken is how deceptively precise it is. Unlike in Splatoon 1, running swim speed up on your gear does not affect the movement speed of your Kraken. Additionally, the Kraken is massive and usually has to resort to its linear forward dashes to clear large distances quickly. All of this is to say that Kraken can feel uncomfortably clunky at times, especially if activated in an area with a lot of irregular stage geometry. Regular squids are far more nimble than a Kraken is, so the Kraken user has to get creative and predict their target's movements to consistently score picks with it. Simply holding forward and trying to chase someone down usually doesn't get you very far. It's all about predicting their next move and cutting them off or backing them into an awkward position where they have few ways of dodging your next attack. A lot of people assume Kraken is a very easy special to use since the user is invincible while it's active. How is it even possible to use it poorly, right? But the truth is, it's a fairly finicky special that requires a lot of time and practice to get consistent value out of it. And those are the important things I want to emphasize here: time and practice. Kraken is a fairly complex special with a lot of powerful strengths balanced out by some very important weaknesses. Understanding those weaknesses and knowing how to play around them is what separates the Kraken rookies from the veterans. While a novice is dying in activation, missing picks, running out of special duration in horrible spots, just making an absolute fool of themselves, a seasoned Kraken veteran knows exactly where to pop their special, knows which targets to prioritize, and where they want to be when their special ends. In the right hands, Kraken is capable of single-handedly wiping a team and turning a game around, but you have to be aware of its limitations and know how to use it to pull that kind of play off. Alright, now that we've gotten all the boring stuff out of the way, we can move on to the fun part of this video. What is Kraken good for? Right away, let's talk about the most unique and most important part of Kraken as a special. It makes you invincible. No other special in Splatoon 3 can do that, and obviously, being immune to all damage for 8 seconds is pretty powerful. All the Kraken's best applications stem from the fact that once your special is active, there is very little the enemy team can do to fight back or stop the Kraken. At best, they could try to slow it down or stall it out, as we talked about in the previous section. Up until recently, the most popular application of said invincibility was by using it to get free super jumps for your teammates anywhere in the map, which is what made Kraken cheese possible. But that doesn't exist anymore, so there's no point dwelling on it. The first thing you need to understand about Kraken is the fact that it's a trade-off. While your Kraken is active, you are locked out of using your main and sub weapons for at least 8 seconds. In a game like Splatoon, a lot can happen in 8 seconds, and there are instances where having access to your main and sub would be more beneficial than simply being invincible, namely if you're trying to pressure opponents on higher ground. Before every activation, you need to ask yourself if being invincible for 8 seconds will let you do something you otherwise wouldn't be able to. Fortunately for Kraken, there are plenty of situations where this is the case. At its core, Kraken is a control special. Because it's an invincible instant kill hitbox, when a Kraken is activated, it immediately becomes the top priority for the enemy team to deal with. The logical response to seeing an enemy Kraken is to run away, and although Kraken users can score picks on fleeing targets with well-aimed dashes and proper prediction, this is inherently inconsistent, especially if there's level geometry that makes moving as a Kraken difficult. This is why Kraken is at its best when coordinated with a proper team push. The Kraken's teammates have the range and mobility to easily pick off the foes desperately panicking to run away from a Kraken, and now you can see the synergy. The Kraken creates the space for your teammates to take, and your teammates take out the enemy players. The opposing players can't focus on both the Kraken and its teammates, and whichever one they choose to prioritize, the other can swoop in for an easy pick. The Kraken doesn't even need to get any picks to be useful, so long as it's disrupting the enemy and creating openings for your teammates to get picks, it's doing its job. A lot of seasoned Kraken users compare the act of using Kraken to herding goats, and I completely agree. It's all about pushing targets around the map and having your teammates cut them off at where they're logically going to run. This is an extremely general macro game concept that's applicable in all modes. It makes Kraken most similar to other entry tool specials, such as Trizuka, Crab Tank, Zipcaster, and Inkjet. 3 of those specials are considered highly desirable, and Kraken's right there with them in terms of its use cases. This same idea can be applied to defensive situations. If your team is in disadvantage and the enemy team is pushing in hard, a defensive Kraken can essentially force the opposing team to drop their push and fall back to mid, giving your team the breathing room to regroup and take back some lost ground. In a best case scenario, your defensive Kraken can even catch impatient players off guard and get a nice reversal, outright canceling the opposing team's push and creating the opportunity for your team to retaliate. Although Kraken works best when you have teammates alive to play with your Kraken as we've discussed, a defensive Kraken to keep the enemy team stalled when you're 3 down and it's up to you to hold down the front line gives your team the time to respawn, regroup, and push as a team. It's common sense for players to attempt to dive the last player left alive on a team. Being 3 down is never ideal, but it is still an infinitely better position to be in when compared to being wiped. By activating Kraken in these situations, you are making it literally impossible for your team to be wiped. This is especially important for the many backlines that have Kraken, as it's not uncommon for the anchor of the team to be the last one alive. And hey, while we're talking about defensive utility, an often overlooked aspect of Kraken that I want to touch on here is how good it is at countering other specials. Most specials in Splatoon 3 are designed in such a way that they can be cancelled by enemy players prematurely as a form of counterplay. You know, like Inkjets and Zipcasters can be shot out of the sky, Vacuums and Ultra Stamps can be hit through if flanked from the sides and behind, Booyah Bombs and Crab Tanks can be shredded, etc, etc. Of course, specials are obviously very powerful, so simply rushing them down hoping to cancel them prematurely is a very risky play and usually results in the player attempting to do so getting splatted. But remember, Kraken is invincible. There's no risk involved. You could just go up to someone and cancel their special for free. Teams naturally coordinate their pushes with their specials. In other words, they depend on their specials to create opportunities, take space, and score points. If you cancel the key special the enemy team was relying on, you're effectively canceling their push. Kraken might not be the anti-special special, but seriously, don't underestimate its defensive utility. So okay, Kraken is really good at rallying your team and controlling space. Those are good macro game applications, but what about individual play-by-play utility? A very basic yet important concept to grasp in Splatoon is the idea of key locations, where they are and when to take them. These are the most important locations on the map. If you have control of the key locations, you have control of the game. Some common examples of key locations would be the stacks on Mako Mart, this top left overhang area in Ship Shape, and this back left shelf area in Ink Block, commonly referred to as bats. These are the positions the attacking team wants to take, and conversely, the defending team wants to hold. Kraken is a fantastic special for not only moving into these key locations using your invincibility, but establishing a stronghold in them, as by moving into Kraken, you're forcing any opponents holding that location to either stand their ground and risk dying, or to simply forfeit that position. Again, this is a pretty general concept that's applicable in all modes, whether it be the key defensive positions the opposing team needs to hold to stop the objective in Tower Control or Rainmaker, an aggressive lockout position in Splat Zones, or the optimal scoring location in Clamblets. Kraken can move in onto any of these locations and secure them basically for free. Have a few teammates follow your Kraken into that newly undefended key location, and now those positions belong to your team. This is how Kraken should be used in these modes, not wastefully sitting on the tower or chasing down some random guy caught out of position. Also, have you noticed that none of these applications actually require the Kraken user to get picks for the special to be useful? A lot of people sell Kraken short just because it's not as reliable for getting picks as other entry specials, like Zuka or Inkjet, but the Kraken doesn't need to get picks to fulfill its purpose. If anything, whatever picks you get of Kraken should be considered a nice bonus, because the primary purpose of the special is exerting control over an area, and that's something Kraken uniquely does better than its fellow entry specials, since once the Kraken's active, there is very little the enemy team can do in the way of counterplay other than just running away. When used properly, Kraken can be a very powerful special, you just need to have the eyes to see it and be willing to put in the time to get consistent value out of it. But wait, I'm not done yet. That's my take on Kraken's overall role and purpose in a typical match, but what about actually using it? Like I've alluded to a few times so far, Kraken, contrary to popular belief, is not an easy special to use. It's finicky, deceptively precise, and easily punishable. To address some of those things... Okay, So there are a lot of little things I've picked up on over the past year of using Kraken. Knowing what you can do with Kraken is one thing, being good at doing them is something completely different. So here's a compilation of a bunch of unrelated miscellaneous tips I can offer as someone who's activated Kraken thousands of times with results on every end of the spectrum. I've said it a few times already, but Kraken is big, clunky, and kind of awkward to move with, especially when compared to normal swim forms. You gotta get creative and be smooth with your movement in order to actually score any picks with it. Obviously, predicting where people are logically going to run and cutting them off with a swift dash is a big part of getting picks consistently with Kraken, but there are a lot of little quirks to movement that you can incorporate to improve your Kraken gameplay. First and foremost, a very common mistake I see novice Kraken users make is only moving by dashing constantly or never using the dash at all. Only moving by dashing forward is more common and admittedly an easy trap to fall into. Trust me, I had that phase too when I first picked up Kraken. You move a lot faster while dashing and are immune to knockback, so why shouldn't you dash everywhere? Well, you can't change directions while dashing, nor can you cancel a dash once the ZR button is released. Dashing everywhere means only moving in a jerky, stop-and-go kind of motion, which not only makes it unnecessarily difficult to move around the map depending on the level geometry, but it makes your movement predictable, and this in turn makes it easier for your opponents to anticipate and dodge your attacks. Like with most things, a healthy compromise between swimming and dashing with Kraken is optimal. If anything, you should really only ever dash when clearing large distances on flat ground quickly, or when trying to line up a pick on a fleeing target. Otherwise, swimming allows you to stay far more nimble and greatly reduces the odds of Kraken getting stuck on a corner or divot in the stage geometry. A lot of people fall into the trap of only dashing a Kraken, since the dash is the scary part that can kill people in one hit. But don't underestimate the reliability of the jump attack. It kills more slowly, sure, but it's far easier to land consistently. The lack of a charge means you don't need to predict enemy movement as much, and you still have access to all your normal movement options while using it, like squid rolling. On that note, I want to suggest that instead of simply jumping to execute the jump attack, you should try to squid roll into your targets as much as possible, since it doesn't kill your momentum and in fact lets you preserve your momentum while also changing direction on a dime. Squid rolling back and forth on top of someone is a good way to reliably splat your targets quickly, and if the target is next to a paintable wall, you can take this trick a step further by squid rolling onto the wall and then immediately jumping off the wall for a lightning fast splat, since you don't need to wait to touch the ground a second time before executing another squid roll. Generally speaking, players near walls are really easy targets for Kraken, not only because of that wall trick, but because being backed up against a wall means players have fewer directions they can run, reducing the amount of prediction required. In general, fluid movement is the big thing that separates the Kraken pros from the Kraken Joe Schmoes, and I'm not gonna lie, I make mistakes like everyone else sometimes. But this is the aspect of Kraken that requires the most practice to get good at, so don't get discouraged if your first couple hundred Krakens feel slow and clunky. Good movement comes with time. Movement is also a highly personalized trait in Splatoon, so aside from the general tips I've already given, the best advice I can provide to improve your movement is to just keep practicing and seeing what habits work for you. The startup and end lag on Kraken is the biggest weakness the special has, and the most common mistake I see with novice Kraken users is dying in one or the other. The first thing you need to understand about this is that most of the time, you need to pop Kraken a little bit away from the action, and you need to fall back while your Kraken is still active to ensure you don't die during recovery. This means your 8 seconds of special duration can feel more like 6 to 4 seconds. If you go on sendow.inc and look at a lot of popular gear builds for Kraken weapons, you'll notice anywhere from 2 subs to a main of special power is pretty standard, and this is why. That extra special duration really comes into play once you factor in that some of your special duration has to be wasted for the sake of not dying during activation or recovery. Let's talk about the startup lag first. The first thing you should do is to train your brain to not use Kraken as a panic button. Seriously, it's one of the worst panic specials in the game. Stop doing this. Using Kraken for the sake of self-preservation is a legitimate application of the special. It's far from an ideal application, since you'd much rather use that Kraken to create space for your team, but using Kraken to get yourself out of a bad situation is a completely valid reason to pop your special. However, if you're going to attempt this, make sure you have a corner to duck behind or a ledge to hide under before clicking in the right stick. Giving yourself some cover gives you the extra precious time you need for your Kraken to fully activate. If you see an opportunity, or if the player rushing you down clearly isn't anticipating a sudden Kraken, you can try going for a reversal to get a pick on the player who was rushing you down, but otherwise there is no shame in using your Kraken to simply fall back and regroup with your team while disrupting the enemy team and commanding their attention. Additionally, if there's some space between you and the enemy, but you have the foresight to tell that the situation will turn for the worse within the next couple of seconds, popping Kraken as a preemptive move can work to scare enemy players off. But in that case, you might be better just jumping out altogether and preserving your Kraken. It really depends on the context of the game. In terms of activating Kraken for offensive purposes, the best places to do so are right around the corner from the front line or in an area that's heavily contested with your teammates so they can cover for you. You should never, ever try to pop Kraken if you're within the range of an opposing player already firing at you, and try to be careful about popping Kraken within range of players with lethal bombs, especially splat bombs. You can move slightly during the activation animation of Kraken, but it's pretty stiff, and it's pretty common for shorter range weapons to try and roll a splat bomb at your feet while you're stuck in activation to cancel your special early. By that same logic, try to avoid popping Kraken if there's an enemy charger alive that could potentially have a line of sight on you. Because chargers play so far away a lot of the time and often only need a single shot to kill, it's pretty easy to think you're safe to pop Kraken since there's no one around you, only to get sniped out of nowhere. Generally speaking, the flowchart for where to pop Kraken should be popping it behind cover near the front line and neutral, within close proximity of your teammates when there are no lethal bombs or shorter range weapons who could cancel your Kraken on sight, or if your team has manpower and you want to pop Kraken to rally your team and take out the last few enemy players quickly, you can afford to pop Kraken very aggressively out in the open if you see the enemy team retreating. As for not dying during the end lag after your special duration is up, the best advice I can give is to train yourself to be disciplined with Kraken. I said it before, and I'll say it again. It's very easy to get carried away with Kraken and not even realize you're running out of time with it. As you use Kraken more, you'll get a bit of a feel for how long your special duration is, but typically, if I can tell that there's no obvious target for me to lock onto with Kraken, and I know that half of my special duration is already up, that's usually my sign to back off of Kraken and play things a bit more safely. It's very tempting to see someone and think to yourself, let me just pick off this guy real quick, they're right there, I can get him, and then back up. But trust me, knowing your limits of Kraken and being ready to back off to preserve your life is worth infinitely more to your team than stubbornly trying to chase some random guy down for just a bit longer, barely missing the kill, and getting punished immediately after. Show some restraint and fall back. But therein lies the question, where should you fall back to? When using Kraken offensively, the goal is to take space and rally your team forward. This means that ideally, you want to come out of your Kraken in a more forward position than where you started. Like with activation, try to be behind cover or within proximity to teammates when your special duration is up to avoid being punished in end lag, and I especially want to highlight the importance of making sure you have paint around you when you come out of Kraken. Krakens having their special duration end when they're surrounded in enemy ink is the most common way I see Krakens get punished. Even if there are no opposing players around them in the moment, having no paint to move in makes you a sitting duck that's extremely easy to rush down and kill. This is the most important part of successfully retreating with Kraken. If you end up in a location that's even moderately covered in your own team's ink, you'll probably be fine. This is another reason why it's important to show restraint and discipline during your Kraken. Players who are aware of Kraken's weaknesses will often try to lead Kraken users deep into their own territory, so they can be easily punished when their special duration ends. Be aware of this, and be able to recognize when it's happening. If you feel like you've been chasing the same person for an uncomfortably long amount of time in a single direction that's away from the rest of your team, chances are you probably won't have a lot of paint when you come out of Kraken, so know when to pull back. In my experience, failing to play around the activation and recovery lag of Kraken is the most common mistake Kraken users make. Hell, even someone with as much experience as myself still isn't immune to getting carried away with the special. However, one bit of encompassing advice I want to give is that being too safe of Kraken is a much better problem to have than being too aggressive. Falling back and being able to play with your team after coming out of Kraken is almost always more beneficial to your team than maybe getting one extra pick and dying for it. If you're thinking about running Kraken in a comp, it's important to know what subs and specials you may want your teammates to consider running to make it easier to get more value out of your Krakens. Generally speaking, anything that aids in tracking makes for a tremendous combo with Kraken, since it makes it easier to see where your teammates are running to. So subs like Point Sensor, Angle Shooter, and Torpedo all have fantastic synergy of Kraken. Toxic Mist is also a natural pairing, as it not only makes it easier to see opponents, but it makes it harder for them to run away. In terms of specials, obviously Tactical works well with Kraken, but Cooler works well with every special in the game, so I'm not going to discuss it any further than that. Beyond the obvious synergy it has with Cooler, tracking specials work pretty well with Kraken for the same reason as the tracking subs. So Wavebreaker of course makes for a good combo with Kraken. But I also want to give special attention to Kraken's synergy with Killer Whale and Tenta Missiles. Both of these specials mark enemy locations for all to see, making it easier to chase targeted players with Kraken, but they also force those targets to move. Remember that Kraken is all about pushing people around the map and corralling them into unfavorable positions. Adding homing lasers or missiles on them to focus on makes it all too easy for people to wander right into your Kraken or into a teammate who's moving with the specials. Leave it to one of the most controversial specials in the game to pair well with the other two most controversial specials in the game. Beyond those, Kraken naturally works well when coordinated with its fellow entry specials, such as Inkjet, Crab Tank, and especially Trizuka, since the 53 minimum splash damage combos nicely with the 60 damage from a single jump attack. I want to take a minute to touch on some Rainmaker specific applications. There's a trick some people like to use in Rainmaker where they surf the Kraken. I like to call it Kraken armor. Kraken is invincible and very large, much larger than a normal squid, meaning a teammate of yours can swim inside your Kraken, effectively shielding them from all incoming damage, so long as they're able to move in sync with you. The most popular application of this trick is in Rainmaker, where the Rainmaker carrier swims inside your Kraken to score some free points. This is especially useful for pushing the Rainmaker through uninkable slicks, such as the one on Eeltail. It's pretty finicky and difficult to pull off consistently, but it's something worth considering as a Kraken user. Conversely, when used on defense, Kraken is maybe the best Rainmaker killer in the entire game. I've mentioned numerous times already that normal swim forms are far more nimble than Krakens are, but an Inkling weighed down by the Rainmaker moves much slower than a Kraken, and that glowing white light on their head makes it effortless to see where they're running to. In overtime, Kraken can often act as a GG special a la Strikes or Booyah Bomb in tower control. It's that effective. Also, don't forget that Kraken's dashes are pretty good at popping the Rainmaker shield. It's not amazing at it by any means, but when you look at the weapons that have Kraken, aside from Heavy Splatling and Bloblobber, they all struggle with sustained object damage, so Kraken often lets them pop the Rainmaker or keep it stalled against enemy gunfire in a pinch when the main weapon wouldn't be able to. Just be careful not to accidentally dash after the shield has been popped, resulting in you picking up the Rainmaker when you didn't mean to. That's an easy way to waste your special and a very embarrassing way to get yourself killed, so try to stay above that. I mentioned earlier how Kraken makes for a phenomenal counter to many other specials in the game, but there are two particular specials that Kraken has some unique interactions with that I want to highlight. Tenta Missiles is a special that Kraken can't counter outright, but it can nullify the effect of. When playing against a team that has Tenta Missiles in their comp, something that I like to do a lot is to deliberately save my Kraken until I see the missile user pop their special and lock missiles onto me. When you see this happen, that's a great excuse to pop Kraken and attempt to tear things up on your own, since while you're invincible, you don't need to worry about dying to the missiles, and you'll be leading the missiles away from your team and into the enemy's turf, effectively wasting the missiles that were locked onto you. Just remember not to get too carried away while doing this. Another niche special that Kraken has a unique interaction with is Splatter Color Screen. I assume that because Kraken is fully invincible, it doesn't register any damage, meaning Screen has no effect on Krakens that pass through it. Popping Kraken deliberately to run right through a screen is an easy and very satisfying way to catch enemy players on the other side of it completely off guard for a few quick picks, because Screen is the coolest special in the game and blocks their vision just as well as yours. Like a lot of subs and other specials, Kraken isn't great for every stage in the game. It's definitely better suited to some compared to others. Sometimes the best way to use Kraken is to recognize that you'd be better off not using it at all. Kraken users want to be able to force opposing players to move in predictable ways so it's easy for them to pick off those players or corral them into unfavorable positions where their teammates can easily pick them off. Therefore, Kraken works best on stages that present players with limited escape options. Smaller, more linear maps such as Mahi Mahi Resort, Brindwater Springs, Eeltail Alley, and Umami Ruins are all very strong maps for Kraken for this reason. Beyond that, Kraken naturally likes maps that are easy for it to move in. Remember, Kraken's size and reliance on clunky dashes to get around quickly make it easy for it to get caught on corners, ledges, and other irregular features in the stage geometry. Flat maps with smooth ramps between elevation changes are great for Kraken, with Hammerhead Bridge, Hagglefish Market, Barnacle and Dime, and Ship Ship Cargo Co., amongst others, all being strong maps for it. Conversely, maps with a lot of elevation changes, ledges, and corners to get stuck on, and grates that Krakens can't swim over tend to be weaker for it. This includes maps such as Mako Mart, Undertow Spillway, Crab Lake Capital, Mincemeat Metalworks, and especially Flounder Heights. Even still though, depending on the mode or where specifically you use Kraken, it can still be tremendously useful on all of these modes. Undertow, Mincemeat, and Mako have mids that are awkward to move in Kraken, but outside of mid, they're free real estate. Crab Leg's emphasis on grates and checkpoint jumps in Rainmaker means that Kraken isn't exactly great for that particular mode, but in zones and clamplets, where you could play 90% of the map in the flat pit that is mid, Kraken can have a field day down there. So this is probably my strangest tip in this entire video, and it may very well just be a me thing, but it might be something worth considering. If you want to seriously consider picking up a Kraken weapon to use regularly, I would highly recommend you play as an Inkling instead of an Octoling. It sounds ridiculous, I know, however, I find that it is significantly easier to aim your forward dashers when playing as an Inkling. The pointed head of the Inkling's Kraken makes an arrow, which I find makes aiming forward dashes much easier than the bulbous round head of the Octoling Kraken. Trust me, in Splatoon 2, and for the first 6 months of Splatoon 3, I was one of those people who would regularly switch between playing as an Inkling and Octoling every now and then, just to mix things up. When Kraken came out in March of 2023, and I decided I was gonna pick it up, I switched to being an exclusive Inkling, and my performance of Kraken got better as a result. Again though, this is such a weird little nuance of Kraken that I wouldn't be surprised if struggling to aim with the Octoling Kraken was just a me issue. Alright, I think I'm done. When the .96 Scout Deco came out 1 year ago in March of 2023, I decided I wanted to learn everything I could about the new special I was expected to play for as long as I continued to play Splatoon 3. And in the past year, here's what I learned. Kraken is not a selfish, showy, one-man killing machine. It's not a low skill floor panic button, and it's definitely not a brain-dead cheesy invincibility special that ruins the game. It's a multi-purpose, versatile, and genuinely fun to use and play against heavily team-dependent special that requires dedication, practice, and effort to get results out of. Kraken is a good special, with or without the cheese strategy it was defined by for so long. You just need to have the eyes to see it.